Hello everyone! If you're watching this video, I assume it's because you'd like a little extra guidance on chapters 21 and 22, which is totally fine. I'll start with 21. So remember, one of the annotation questions on the annotation link is to think about why it's significant that it took the jury until almost 11 o'clock at night to reach a decision. So if you turn to page 280, that's page 280, you can read the part where the time skips. So the trial happens in the afternoon and the evening. The children return to the courthouse. Where is it? Oh, there we go. So they return to the courthouse. And everyone is sitting there waiting for the jury. In courts, the jury doesn't deliberate in front of people. They go into a special jury room where they can talk behind closed doors with each other, and they don't necessarily have to worry about other people overhearing. So at the bottom of 280-ish, it says, the old courthouse clock suffered its preliminary strain and struck the hour, 8 deafening bongs that shook our bones. So it's 8 o'clock. When it bonged 11 times, I was past feeling. Tired from sleep, I allowed myself a short nap against Reverend Sykes' comfortable arm and shoulder. So everyone is just sitting, including the children, are just sitting in the courtroom for 3 hours while the jury is deliberating. So think about why it took them so long. Why would it take them so long to come to a decision? After we listened to the court case, I gave you about 2 minutes to decide whether Tom should be acquitted or convicted. And all of you managed to decide it in 2 minutes. So when this jury is talking about it, why does it take them 3 hours? That's one thing to think about. Next, the other annotation question has to do with the very end of the chapter. And this is actually a key quote, and one of the key quotes that will be on your test, in fact. So we have a nice sequence where Scout is narrating her thoughts that we'll get into more on Friday, tomorrow. That's pretty much the only part of this chapter we're going to look at in class. But if you look in your book on about the middle of 282, this is the part where we find the verdict. A jury never looks at a defendant it has convicted, and when this jury came in, not one of them looked at Tom Robinson. So you immediately know that they convicted him with the crime. The foreman handed a piece of paper to Mr. Tate, who handed it to the clerk, who handed it to the judge. I shut my eyes. Judge Taylor was polling the jury. Guilty. 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 I peeked at Jem. His hands were white from gripping the balcony rail. His shoulders jerked as if each guilty was a separate stab between them. So every person on the jury voted guilty. But as Atticus is leaving the courtroom, he goes down the middle aisle. So Scout says on that last page, 283, he must have wanted to go home the short way because he walked down the middle aisle towards the south exit. And then she says, I was reluctant to take my eyes from the people below us, from the image of Atticus's lonely walk down the aisle, right? Because he just failed. He tried so hard. He, put his family at risk. His extended family are all disappointed in him for standing up for a black man. He put his children at risk, but he knew it was the right thing to do. He knew it was the moral thing to give Tom the fairest chance he could, and he did all he could. He gave all of the evidence that points to the fact that it was not Tom, and it was instead Bob Ewell, and the jury still ignored it. So, I mean, you've got to feel pretty defeated at that point. But the annotation question was, note the reaction of Reverend Sykes and the rest of the people in the colored balcony when Atticus walks by. Why do they do what they do? So what they do is Scout looks around and they're all standing All around us and in the balcony on the opposite wall, the Negroes were getting to their feet. Reverend Sykes' voice was as distant as Judge Taylor's. Miss Jean Louise, stand up. Your father's passing. So as he's exiting out the courtroom, they all stand up. Well, when do you usually stand up for someone? Like, physically stand up? I usually think about, like, theater shows or, you know, when people do a good job performing, which is their job, you stand up, you give them a standing ovation. And the balcony isn't clapping, right? This isn't like a rock concert, but they all stand up to show their appreciation and their respect. Because Atticus did what he could, right? He helped someone from their community. He tried his best to let Maycomb see that Tom Robinson is innocent. And he did a good job with it. He didn't, you know, give it a half effort. He gave it full effort. And so they stand to show their, I guess, their appreciation. Because even though he tried and lost, at least he tried. So then Scout and the kids are, you know, encouraged to stand as well, and show their respect to their dad. So it's basically a thank you for your effort. And sometimes people don't understand that when they're reading, so I just wanted to clarify. Chapter 22. The one thing you will want to look for on your own, if you didn't already, is try to look for the points that Miss Maudie makes to try to convince Jem that people's ideas in Maycomb are changing. Because Atticus losing the trial is really hard on Jem, especially. Because Jem is like, you guys, he sees that Tom should have been acquitted. He should have been declared innocent, and he wasn't. And for, you know, a 12-year-old kid, that's really hard to deal with, to see that, like, you can do everything right. You can be innocent like Tom, and you can still get convicted because people are so set in their racist ways, basically. So it's really difficult for him, and Miss Maudie tries to cheer him up a bit in this chapter. Then, at the end of the chapter, the confrontation that occurs between Bob Ewell and Mr. Atticus, right? Because the trial is over, but the conflict is not. Atticus went into that courtroom to try to prove Tom innocent, and in doing so, he basically proved Bob guilty, and the whole town knows that. Everybody that was in that courtroom knows that. So obviously Mr. Ewell is not going to take that well. So at the very end of the chapter is the important part that's going to lead to the climax of the book. Because as dramatic as the trial was, that was not actually the climax of the book. It's the very last paragraph on 290. So it says, well, I'll start a little bit earlier, about the middle of the page on 290, really. Let me find it on here so you can follow along. Here we go. Something was wrong. Mr. Avery was red in the face from a sneezing spell and nearly blew us off the sidewalk when we came up. Miss Stephanie was trembling with excitement, and Miss Rachel caught Dill's shoulder. These are all their neighbors. You get on in the backyard and stay there, she said. There's danger a-comin'. What's the matter? I asked. Ain't you heard yet? It's all over town. At that moment, Aunt Alexandra came to the door and called us, but she was too late. It was Miss Stephanie's pleasure to tell us. This morning, Mr. Bob Ewell stopped Atticus on the post office corner, spat in his face, and told him he'd get him if it took the rest of his life. So now we have Bob Ewell, the angry child beater, basically, who wants to get revenge on Atticus. And that's going to be what leads to the conflict in the last few chapters here. So hopefully that helped if you were struggling with finding the important points in these two chapters.